Henry VIII had 6 wives, but do you know which one survived him? If you said Anne of Cleves, you would be correct. Though not a kingdom or empire, Cleves was nevertheless a considerable player in European affairs, and Anne's family was prominent there, if not royalty. Her father Johann was Duke of Cleves, and died when Anne was 2 years old. Her mother, Maria, was the daughter of the Duke of Saxony, and she acted as regent during Anne's childhood. As she waited for Henry to arrive from France, Anna had another one of those famous portraits done by Holbein. But unlike the earlier one, this one was not flattering. In fact, it was fairly realistic and showed her plain appearance, which contrasted sharply with Henry's expectations. In July of 1540, Parliament voted to dissolve the marriage, and both Henry and Anne agreed to the split. Or would he imprison or execute her like he did 2 of his previous wives? She was granted the magnificent Richmond Palace to live in along with 26 other homes and estates, including Hevercassa, once the home of Anne Boleyn. In addition to these lavish residences, she was given annual income of £3,000, an annuity of £200, and several lucrative offices and titles. Most remarkably, though, Henry gave her the style of King's Sister, a previously unheard-of title that signified her elevated status above other women at court and ensured she would never be married off to another man. Edward VI. Under Mary I, Anne's position became a bit trickier. Since Mary was a devout Catholic and Anne was a Protestant, she never accepted. However, choosing instead to remain independent and in charge of her own destiny. Once released, she retired to her estate where she lived the remainder of her life. After suffering a stroke, she died on July 1557 and was buried in Westminster Abbey in the chapel of Henry VII. Her tomb is a simple one, modest but dignified, which reflects the way she chose to live her life. Yet Anne still managed to maintain her dignity and status. She was named one of Mary's 4 chief ladies of the bedchamber and continued to enjoy her privileges. Thanks for watching. Yet she defied the odds and created a unique path to happiness and fulfillment. She was a woman ahead of her time in that she refused to be defined by marriage and motherhood, and she proved that a woman didn't need a man to be powerful. Her life was not a fairy tale, nor was it a tragedy. It was something all its own, a story of survival, self-determination, and quiet dignity. And that Anne of Cleves stands out not as the unfortunate wife who escaped a terrible king, but as a strong, intelligent woman who took control of her destiny and lived a full and satisfying life on her own terms. Only time would tell. Technically, they never divorced. However, Henry claimed that the marriage was never valid since it was unconsummated, and therefore he was free to wed someone else. Anne accepted this explanation and went along with it, citing her own supposed ugliness as the reason for the lack of consummation. She didn't have to worry about producing an heir or being replaced, and she had enough money and properties to keep her in luxury for life. Not only that, but Henry made sure she was treated well. He visited her frequently and included her in important ceremonies and celebrations. In fact, he brought her along on his second marriage, his 6-month honeymoon with Catherine Howard. How nice of him. To further make his case and protect himself against any accusations, Henry ordered Hans Holbein's original portrait destroyed. There she threw lavish parties and entertained guests, including the young Princess Elizabeth. It was here that Anne befriended the future queen, who called her "my very good Lady Anne," and visited her often. She also remained friendly with Henry, who called her "my sweet sister," and attended his coronation as Queen Mother in 1547. Luckily, Holbein had already made copies, so Anne got one for herself, and another was donated to the king. These 2 paintings, plus the one Anne wore, now form a triptych, an art piece that tells the 3 parts of her story. When the king finally arrived and saw Anne, he was deeply disappointed. He expected a beautiful, elegant woman like he'd seen in the portrait, not someone who appeared ordinary. To make matters worse, Anne was wearing a dress she had chosen herself, which she thought was attractive, but Henry loathed. And that was the final straw. Anne was raised in a strict but loving household, far from the intrigue and drama of a royal court. Instead, he sent her back to her own house, effectively ending the union before it really started. Anne was understandably devastated, but she knew that she couldn't fight the king, so she submitted to his wishes and agreed to the annulment. While Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anna of Cleves, and Catherine Parr are all well known, their stories tend to overshadow the last Queen of England to bear the title Queen Consort, Lady Anne of Cleves. The king then comforted her, saying that he would always be her good and gracious lord, and that she would never want for anything while he was king. Clearly, Henry felt remorse over how he treated her and wanted to soften the blow, but how exactly was he going to do that? You see, Henry had recently broken with the Roman Catholic Church, and he needed an additional wife, who was Protestant, to bolster his new Church of England. In addition to religion, Anne was also a political asset, because she was related to the families of 2 important German princes, making her a good candidate for an alliance. More importantly, however, Henry had seen a flattering portrait of her painted by the renowned artist, Hans Holbein the Younger. He fell head over heels in love with the image, and immediately began divorce proceedings with his 3rd wife, Jane Seymour, so that he could marry Anne. Yet her story is a fascinating one. It's one of survival, tact, and smarts, and one that doesn't have the tragic ending so many of her sisters-in-law had. Plus, she was close to making a marriage match with a suitor in Portugal, which she liked much better. Still, she knew that refusing the king would be unthinkable, and that her family would pressure her to say yes. And they did. Anne's mother, brother, and 2 sisters all encouraged her to accept the king's proposal. Anne was born in 1515 in the Duchy of Cleves, a small and modest but politically important Protestant duchy in Germany. In July of 1539, Anne's life took a drastic turn when England's King Henry VIII asked her family for her hand in marriage. At first, Anne was shocked by the proposition. She had never met Henry and had no interest in becoming Queen of England. Anne arrived in England in December of 1539 and stayed at a manor home belonging to Thomas Cromwell, who had been instrumental in arranging the match. When Henry realized that Anne did not look like her picture, he refused to consummate the marriage. Parting was not easy, however, and when Henry told Anne he wanted to send her away forever, she wept. Well, the annulment was swift, coming just 6 months after the wedding. With the annulment finalized, Anne was free to go, but she had no idea what would happen next. Would Henry keep his word and provide for her? Anne's fate was far more generous than she could have ever imagined. What made this arrangement so brilliant was that it allowed Anne to remain a noble lady in her own right. The complications and dangers of being a queen. As a condition of the annulment, Anne was not allowed to leave England, but she spent most of her time at her country estate in Essex. After Henry's death in January of 1547, Anne continued to play an active role at court, serving as a mourner at his funeral and participating in the coronation of his successor, though never again married. Anne was courted by several men, including a Spanish nobleman, the Marquis of Winchester, who wanted her hand in marriage, so that he could use the title of King Es. In 1554, following a miscarriage by one of Henry's illegitimate sons, Anne was accused of using witchcraft and imprisoned for 5 months. Anne of Cleves had many things working against her, including her looks, her age, and her gender. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing.